Right now I'm going to go over my different clays I use whenever I sculpt. I have several different things laid out in front of me here, so we'll take a moment. Start on the left end. Once again, I'm a lefty. To hell with all you right-handed people. These are the most common clays I use. These are Sculpies. I have several different varieties I use constantly. I have the white Sculpey. Very pliable, easy to use. It's a bit sticky. I use that sparingly. Usually on bases. I have what I use most commonly, which is regular Super Sculpey. You can find any of these clays at craft stores and hobby stores, along with Fimo clays. Super Sculpey is the standard for making what are called maquettes, which are just miniature versions of what will be full scale eventually. And once again, Sculpey also sells different varieties and colors of clays. You know, you have softer flesh tones all the way up to reds, greens, purples, blues, the whole rainbow effect for you. And finally, a Sculpey I really like to use for miniatures because it is very firm and grabs detail very easily, which is Super Sculpey Firm. And just to show you how firm it is, it takes a bit of pressure to get that to flatten out. Problem with that is it doesn't stick to itself very easily once you've started sculpting, so you have to do very tiny amounts in order to get it to work out right. So that's those. Next we have epoxy putties, which are really good if you're doing fixing any projects. You can get it in any hardware store, Lowe's, or your general hardware store in your local town has it. Just snip off the end of your tube there, mix in your hands. It smells like ass, just to let you know. Mix it up in your hands till it's a nice uniform color. Problem with this is, once again, you get very little work time with any epoxy that you may use, simply because it begins to harden, and once it's hard, it's about as strong as steel, and you can't really work with it after that unless you have a high-powered Dremel or patience. But you can capture amazing detail just before it sets up. So I recommend that for doing finishing work on miniatures or model kits. Next we have Roma's common sculpture base. This is Roma Plastilina. Roma Plastilina is an oil-based clay with sulfur mixed into it. This clay is great for catching detail. They sell it in many different densities. This is a medium grade density, and as you can see, it's fairly easy to just work with in your hands. Now the problem is that it does have an odor. It is sulfur based, so it does reek, especially if you have large quantities. I actually got rid of all my Roma simply because of the smell. I couldn't stand it anymore after 5 years. But there are different Romas. This is a sulfur-free Roma. It's much softer than normal Roma Plastilina. It is the same color basis, but because it is sulfur-free, you can melt it down and reuse it a couple of times. If you want to pour clay into a mold, you can melt this down in a big pot, much like you can do with this. Only difference is that the sulfur will separate from the clay, and you will see this yellow amber colored resin begin to build up in the pot as it separates from the clay. And once you've melted this down and poured it once, you're done. This you can get 2, 3, 4 pours out of it, and it works pretty well after that. And then there is white Roma. I keep it here just simply to try and keep the lint off of it, but that doesn't seem to work. It's still covered in lint. White Roma is again just a sulfur-free Roma, but it just doesn't have the coloring in it. It's great if you're wanting to get, put more of a fleshy look to what you're sculpting, to make your sculpture look more realistic as you're working it. Aside from, because you can get very exaggerated sculptures on like a life cast if you're trying to sculpt out a prosthetic. You can get some amazing detail with this, but it begins to look a little out there as far as the detail work goes. So you have to kind of hold back on this. With this, not so much. You can kind of just let your head go and throw caution to the wind, so to speak. Next up is what I bought to replace my Romas, which is called Clean Clay. Clean Clay is just basically your standard modeling clay. They come in 1 pound bricks, such as this, already separated up into 4 parts. And what this is great for is just, you can melt this down just like any of the other clays. You do clay pours. It's very firm. This is a medium grade firmness, and it can take quite a bit of damage before you lose any detail or texture. I have no complaints about this clay. This is probably one of the better clays I have found so far, and this is also what I've used to sculpt out the Hydra so far. The last thing I have is sculpting wax. Now this is used primarily if you're going to do metal pouring into a mold, simply because then the metal will burn it away. It's sold in 2 pound bricks. There's about 1 pound left here. Everything else is kind of cut up. But it's very hard to manipulate. Now this is great if you're doing very, very fine detail work. Problem is that sculpting it, you can get detail into it very intricately, but then the texture becomes a little rough. So you have to be patient with this clay, or wax, and take your time. And getting it out of a hard mold is a bit of a struggle if you're not pouring something hot into it, such as metal, where it'll just burn away the wax. But this is great for work on minis, just simply because of the fact that you can do a little bit at a time, and it really won't move too much on you. It won't budge. And if you want to be able to blend it in a little bit, what I do is I will just take a lighter and hold it over one of my smoothing tools until it's, just for a few seconds, just so it's hot, and then I'll go through and I will begin to smooth out edges with that. This is for the patient sculptor, which I am not. So that's it for my clays that I have and use. You've probably looked at the tools that I have. Next one, it'll be all about how I've come to know Tom Savini and what all I learned from him, and on the day I've met Dick Smith, the godfather of special makeup effects in the industry today.